challenging roads, sky-high prices, planning mistakes, and yes, even the mandatory naked showering. These are just some of the things that catch first-time visitors in Iceland completely off guard. And after speaking with hundreds of tourists, I keep hearing the same "I had no idea" moments again and again. And they are not just small details, they are the kind of things that can save you money, time and stress and honestly make your whole trip way more enjoyable. And that is exactly what this video is about, because being prepared will separate you from all these masses who show up here completely clueless. And so if you don't want to fall into this rookie mistakes category, then keep watching. And just to give you a little taste, yes, people really do get their rental cars stuck in the rivers here, and no, your insurance won't cover it. But before we get there, let's just start with one of the things that people get often surprised by right on the day one. I'm talking about food, gas, tours, accommodations. Even a basic lunch can run you an equivalent of $40 to $50. And large beer, that's around $18. With that said, it really depends on where and what you eat. If you avoid overpriced downtown restaurants and touristy spots, and you buy alcohol in store or during happy hour, you can expect to pay half of what I mentioned. And some of you, depending on where you live, will actually find the prices to be similar to what you are used to paying back home. Now, rental cars, another big one. Depending on what type of car you get, it can cost you anywhere from $70 to $200 per day, and then add gas, which is amongst the most expensive in Europe. Right now, it's around 315 kronas per liter, which is about $2.3 US. And if you are used to US gas prices, that's roughly $8.7 per gallon. And in Iceland, you'll be driving quite a lot. And if you are thinking about renting a car, jeep or camper van, then I've got some discounts and deals with trusted local companies that you can use, and you'll find those linked below. One of the biggest mistakes that people make here is budgeting like this is a normal European trip, But in fact, Iceland is more like a Hawaii or similar places in terms of prices. It's remote, we have high import costs, and there are limited options once you are outside of Reykjavík. Alright, I know that all of this sounds pretty harsh, but in fact, not everything in Iceland is expensive. And also, for example, flights here can be surprisingly affordable if you book early. And if you are camping, for example, or cooking your own meals or staying in hostels, you can definitely keep your costs down. And honestly, like I mentioned, it really depends on where you are coming from, because if you are, for example, coming from a big city or a tourist-heavy area, you might even find that the prices here aren't quite as bad as people make them often sound. And so if you are still in the planning stage, build in some buffer. And once you are here, be intentional with where your money goes. Now, one thing that catches people off guard quite often, especially if you are coming from a place where stores stay open quite late, is how early grocery stores and liquor stores close here in Iceland. Most supermarkets close by 8 p.m. and liquor stores called Vinbúðin, which by the way is the only place to buy alcohol here, these usually close even earlier, around 6 p.m. And hours can be even shorter on Saturdays, and many stores are completely closed on Sundays and public holidays. Now take that and multiply it if you are heading into the countryside. In smaller towns, store hours can be even shorter. And sometimes there is only one small store in the entire village. And those countryside stores, they are usually great and have everything that you might need. But they are also noticeably more expensive than supermarkets like Bonus or Kronan in the city. And so this is one of the things that I always tell to people, stock up while you are in bigger town, especially if you are, for example, heading out for a few days or traveling over a holiday. Grab snacks for the road and definitely don't wait until the evening to figure out dinner if you are in a remote area. The store could be easily closed or just not exist. And one small tip if you are planning to cook your own meals is bringing or buying a good quality cooler bag. And even though it is pretty cold in Iceland all the time, and that's usually not a problem to keep your groceries cold, it can still help to keep your food fresh and prevent it from spoiling before you check in. And since we are on the topic of shopping, I also want to mention gas stations. Many pumps in the countryside are self-service only and often need a chip and PIN card. And so make sure you either have that or you buy a prepaid card after you land. Also, the gas stations in some areas are quite far apart, and so it's always good to have at least a rough idea where your next fuel stop is going to be. And it's a good rule to always fill up your tank when you are passing through a bigger town, for example. Now, if there is one thing that I see here all the time and that I have covered in so many of my videos, it's people showing up here wearing jeans, sneakers or like free-stacked hoodies and thinking that they are ready for anything. And I kind of get it, maybe you looked at the weather forecast and you saw the 10 degrees Celsius and thought that cannot be that bad. But Icelandic weather is not like in other places. It can really go from completely sunny to sideways rain in a couple of minutes. And the wind, that's the whole different story. You will feel it through your clothes if you are not properly dressed, and that 10 degrees will suddenly feel more like 5. And if you do a little browsing, you can really see that mentioned in so many online forums, from people who had to learn this a hard way. What you really need is to be ready with a proper layering system. Not bulky clothes, but smart ones. At minimum, you want a base layer, a warm insulating layer like a wool sweater or down jacket, and then a waterproof and windproof shell on top. And same goes for your legs. Base layer and ideally waterproof pants. And don't forget the proper shoes that can handle wet, uneven terrain. And yes, you can pack a t-shirt and shorts just in case, but just be prepared for much colder weather. And to make this easier for you, I've actually put together a free Iceland packing list, which by the way you'll find in the link below. And so as you can see, it's not about overpacking, but it's about packing smart. A few high quality layers will just take you way further than stuffing your suitcase with city clothes that just don't do the job. And if you're coming from a warm country, for example, and buying all this gear just for one trip simply doesn't make sense, I completely understand, and the good thing is that there are actually quite a few companies here that actually rent all these things that you might need. But all in all, just trust me when I say that being warm and dry makes everything in Iceland way more enjoyable. Alright, now we have the clothes covered, but let me say the weather can still catch you off guard. Because it's not just cold and rainy, but it is quite unpredictable. And that's especially in winter when it's even more serious. Snowstorms can roll in quickly and make certain roads completely impassable. Which brings me to one of the most underrated tools that you can use here, and that's those warning signs you will see along the roads. They are not just decorative, they literally tell you if it's safe to drive. And I really want you to remember when I say that Icelandic winds are no joke, especially if you are quite unlucky with the weather forecast. They can snap open your car door, they can damage your rental car completely or make it genuinely quite dangerous to drive. Especially if you are like in a high profile vehicle like camper van or if you are towing something. And so before every drive, just check the forecast on weather.is and the road conditions on road.is. You'll get a real-time warnings about wind gusts, icy roads or closures. And then there is also safetravel.is, which sends you alerts and even lets you submit your travel plan for extra safety. And so just to be clear, Icelanders check these sites daily, especially in the winter. And so it's not about being overly cautious, it's just about being smart. And so the key point to remember is that don't try to push through a bad weather like you might do at home. Have a flexible mindset, build margins in your itinerary and always have a plan B for the day. In Iceland, the thing is that sometimes the weather will win and, it's okay, there is nothing else that you can really do. And one tip that I can give you, since I mentioned this damage on a rental car, if it's a very windy day and you are parking and exiting the car, just hold the door with your both hands, because that's quite a frequent damage here, that we see when people basically try to exit the car and the wind gusts simply just rip it from their hands and just damage the door completely. This might completely mess up your plans and you might have to drive back to Reykjavík and get different car and all your plan is upside down now. And so remember that, or even better, when you are parking, try to observe which way is the wind coming from and always try to park against the wind, not with the wind. Now, another thing that surprises a lot of first-time visitors is how extreme daylight can be depending on when you visit. Now, it's not as extreme example as the weather, but still worth mentioning. In summer, you get almost 24 hours of daylight, especially in June. The sun barely dips below the horizon, and even past midnight, it can still feel like golden hour. It is amazing for photography, road trips, and even cramming in a lot of sights into one day. But in winter, it's the complete opposite. You might only get about 4 to 6 hours of daylight, and that means that you really have to plan your days around the daylight window. And you have to be more strategic, so you don't run out of light by the time you get to the main spot that you wanted to see. And here's one thing that people actually miss all the time, and that is that you cannot see northern lights in the summer. The sky just never gets dark enough, so if that's high on your bucket list, make sure you are visiting between the end of August and like mid-April. On the flip side, if you don't like the idea of long dark nights and you want to maximize what you can do in one day, then visiting in May, June, July or most of August might be a better fit. Just know what the trade-off is, no northern lights. And so whichever season you pick, just don't forget to plan around the light, it makes a huge difference on how you experience the country and how much you can realistically see in one day. And if you're wondering how much daylight can you expect during your visit, you can easily look it up on the website like timeandday.com. Now, a lot of people are surprised to learn that you cannot just drive anywhere in Iceland. And I know that it might feel like a wide open country, and it is, but going off-road here even just a little bit is actually illegal. Iceland's nature is incredibly fragile. The moss, lava fields, and highland terrain can take decades, even centuries to recover if they are damaged. The good news is that you don't really need to go off-road to find adventure. Iceland already has some amazing and challenging roads, the so-called F-roads, which are mountain routes that take you deep into the highlands. Just know that these roads are only open in summer and you legally need a 4x4 to drive them. But even then, not every 4x4 is suitable. Some rental companies restrict certain vehicles from specific F-roads, and if you ignore that, your insurance just won't cover any damage. Some F-roads can be accessed in a regular 4x4 like a Dacia Duster, but others require a heavily modified vehicle, mostly because of a big river crossings or rough terrain where you need a high clearance. You just need to research your route carefully if you are planning to drive these roads, and if you are unsure, always check in with your rental company and use sites like road.is. And actually, if you want to know what kind of road to expect during your trip, road.is have this map under the pavement section, so I recommend to check this out. And just remember, never drive off-road for a shortcut, a photo, or because you saw someone else do it. Fines here can be huge, and the locals take this stuff seriously, so respect that. Alright, one thing that surprises a lot of people when they get here, especially if you are, used to traveling in places like Europe, where it's very simple, it's how limited the public transport is here in Iceland. There are no trains, and outside of Reykjavík, buses don't really help much. They are simply not designed around tourism. They mostly just connect towns, and the schedules can be limited. So unless you are doing a short trip, for example, that's based entirely on tours, then renting a car is really the best way to experience Iceland. It just really gives you the freedom to go at your own pace and, stop wherever and whenever you want. And it also allows you to see the places that most tourists who only travel here using buses never see. And if you are nervous about driving here, don't be. The main roads are generally well maintained and the traffic is light compared to most places. Just avoid planning long drives at night, especially in winter. And a good rule of thumb is also to spend your last night somewhere near Reykjavik or basically just somewhere that's not far from the airport. But again, that mostly applies to the winter as that's when the roads tend to close due to the bad weather more frequently. But if renting a car really isn't an option for you, which I can completely understand, don't worry, you can still rely on guided tours. And the easiest way to do that is to simply base yourself out of Reykjavik and then book day trips from there. You can also catch a domestic flight or a long-distance bus to different parts of Iceland, to towns like Akureyri, Eilstaðir or Ísafjörður, and do day tours from those areas too. Or you can also book a multi-day organized bus tour if you really don't want to bother with any planning whatsoever. Either way, just know that in Iceland, having your own car isn't a luxury, it's basically a game changer. The truth is that it just turns your trip from just seeing the highlights into something that's way personal and much more flexible. Alright, this one might seem obvious to some people, but unfortunately it just happens here all the time, and locals absolutely hate it. And the more time you spend driving these roads, the more you realize how many tourists actually do it and how dangerous and annoying this can be. And here's the exact scenario. Imagine you are driving through these stunning landscapes and suddenly you see something beautiful. Say a stunning fjord view or horses by the road. And so you just decide to stop in the middle of the road just to take a photo because why not? There is no traffic, right? Just please don't do that. Icelandic roads are often narrow and winding and have limited visibility at certain places, and I know that there might not be much traffic here, but still, the cars can come around the bend quickly, and if you are parked halfway into the lane or on a blind hill, then it is just incredibly dangerous. It's simple, if you see something worth stopping for, then look for a safe pullout or a designated parking area. And I know that there aren't that many of them here in Iceland. It's definitely something that Iceland should improve on. But honestly, just think about it, the views aren't going anywhere and taking an extra 30 seconds can literally save a life sometimes. Alright, next one. As you can imagine, it might even be you. A lot of people come to Iceland with a long checklist, waterfalls, glaciers, black sand beaches, volcanoes, lagoons, and so much more. And I completely get it. It is an incredible country with so much to see. Just take a look at my Iceland map. There are hundreds of amazing places, from the popular ones to lesser known quiet spots I discovered over the 10 years of living here and exploring this incredible island. But one of the biggest regrets that I hear from the people after their trip all the time is that they just try to see too much too fast. They spend hours in the car every day, racing from one attraction to the next, and by the end of the trip they are exhausted. And even worse, they didn't really experience the places that they went to. Look, Iceland isn't about checking things off the list. That's something that you will learn pretty quickly when you get here. It is just about, being here and soaking it in. Enjoying the scenic drive or a quiet hike to a waterfall with nobody else around. Those quiet, slow moments, that's where Iceland really gets under your skin. The reality is that 7 days isn't enough to see everything, 2 weeks isn't enough, not even a month. And so what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that just don't have a FOMO and give yourself a space, and just don't overcram your itinerary. Book 2 nights in one place instead of one. Swap a packed sightseeing day for something more relaxed, a beach walk, a whale watching tour, or a visit to a local hot spring. Because sometimes the best memories aren't from the number of places you visited, but from the ones you actually gave yourself time to enjoy. And if you plan your trip right, there is a really good chance that you'll fall in love with this island and start planning your next trip before you even leave. Okay, I've got a few more things that tend to surprise people during their first trip to Iceland, but I don't want this video to drag on forever, so let's just fly through the rest. One thing I have noticed is that a lot of people online are being surprised about having to shower naked in Iceland. And yep, that's something that's expected, and it is just part of Icelandic bathing culture. But if that stresses you out, you are not being watched and everyone's actually too focused on their own thing to care. It's not like there is a guard watching you or anything, so don't worry about it. Drink the tap water, and yes, that's right, in Iceland, just do not buy any bottled water in store. The tap water here is actually some of the cleanest in the world. It basically runs straight from the natural springs and it is delicious, I can promise you that, and it is probably even way healthier than the most stuff that you get in the store, so bring a reusable water bottle. And just heads up, the hot water might actually smell a little bit like sulfur. And that's completely normal, it comes from the geothermal sources. It is completely safe to use, but yeah, still, I would stick to the cold water for drinking and cooking. Another thing, signal coverage here is surprisingly good, but not perfect. Now, this is often a pleasant surprise for everyone, and most Iceland has a solid 4G coverage, even in rural areas. With that said, you'll still run into dead zones, especially in places like highlands or more remote regions. That's, by the way, where the offline navigation feature in my Iceland map comes in handy, so you never miss a next stop, even without a signal. Now, drones. No, unfortunately, it is not allowed to fly everywhere, even though people often treat Iceland like it's a wild west of drone flying. And I actually have a videos on my channel on this topic, so check it out later if you are a drone pilot. But in short, you just need to register, and there are still places around the island where you cannot fly a drone at all. Some places have signs, but there are also national parks and protected areas, so do a research before you take off. And speaking of rules and restrictions, you might be actually disappointed to learn that camping in Iceland is illegal. Or well, it's illegal, but you can only stay in designated campsites. Which of course is a bummer, because there are so many amazing places where you can imagine camping. But still, from my experience, Icelandic campsites are usually really nice, plus often have all the amenities there like, showers, toilets, running water, which, let's be honest, is often quite convenient. The next thing that often catches people completely off guard is how busy the popular spots can get in the peak season. Think Golden Circle, South Coast and the main ring road. You won't be alone there. And that's why I always say, don't just stick to the top 10 of the, Instagram famous spots. There is just so much more to see of the main route where you'll often have the entire hikes or viewpoints to yourself. And what about all those popular spots? Well, it's simple, just hit them very early in the morning or late at night and there'll be way less people there. And this next point actually goes hand in hand with the issue of the crowds, especially in the summer. And that's how fast accommodations and car rentals can book out. Thing is, it's not like in the bigger countries where you can just wing it, I mean, technically you can, but the reality is that the options are often limited. In some remote areas, there might be just one guest house in a 50-kilometer radius. And so booking in advance can therefore save you a lot of money, stress and long detours. And booking early also means that you'll get better cars, better locations and won't be stuck with whatever is left. Now I also have a little bonus tip for you. If you are shopping for souvenirs in Iceland or buying any goods throughout your trip, then with each purchase, which is 12,000 kronas, and that is around 100 bucks I think, you can actually claim VAT before you leave the island. And so just keep the receipts and fill up the tax-free form and then just show up with that at the Keflavik airport. But basically what it means is that you can actually claim up to 24% of VAT back. And this money that you get back from the taxes can actually partially cover the cost of some things, like let's say paid parking lots at some of the places that you'll be visiting. And unfortunately, yes, that's right. Even though there aren't many places that are charging entrance fees here in Iceland, many places started charging parking fees. And I actually made an entire video about this topic where I tell you how to pay for those and everything else that you need to know, so definitely don't skip that one.